for an interview with me. And to start out, when the war started, or when you joined the Army, what were you doing before that?
I was a student at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, a sophomore.
Mm-hmm. And did you enlist, or did you get a notice from the draft?
No, I enlisted. I tried to get in the Air Force, and I couldn't because of my eyes. And I tried to enlist in the Navy. I was trying to keep out of the infantry. I tried to enlist in the Navy, and they wouldn't take me because of my eyes. I said, "You'll never draft me." So I enlisted. Got my report for induction about 6 weeks later. So I had a 1-5 number instead of a 3-5.
Now, where did you go through your basic training?
Camp Campbell and Camp Barkley.
Okay. And when did you come to be attached to the 12th Armored?
Sir?
When did you join the 12th Armored Division? Was it Campbell after your training?
I went directly into the 12th from Induction Center in Indianapolis.
Okay. Any experiences in training stand out in your mind? The transition from being a college student to being a soldier, how was that for you?
Well, it was relatively easy. I had no particular problems. I was a farm boy and used to hard work, and I was in training to go out for long distance cross-country running, so I was in good shape. I was 6 foot and 133 pounds, all nails, run all day long. So I was in good shape. I had no problem with the physical training or any of that nature, so I was fortunate in that respect.
Okay, can you tell me about the trip overseas on the ship?
As I recall, we were prohibited from being on deck because of the high seas. We had 50-foot waves, and the bow of the ship would lift out of the water, and then it would drop down, and the screws would come out, and the whole ship would shake, just vibrate all over. It's pretty rough weather. They said it was the worst weather they'd had in the North Atlantic in 19 years. I believed it. Most of us got sick.
So from there to England, any experiences with the English people?
I didn't have too much contact with them because I stayed at camp. I went to London one time, but outside of that I stayed mostly in the Ted City, Windmill Hill, they call it.
So, from there across the channel into France.
Our equipment came in England, so we had a half track, and we loaded up on LSTs, and I spent most of the time in a half track playing cards on the way across the channel. We had a light rigged up in there, and it was comfortable and passed the time away. So, uneventful.
Now, once you got into France and into combat, what was your combat position, your job?
I was in fire control in headquarters, battalion headquarters. So I was called a computer, and we received commands from the front line, and we'd convert those and set it down the firing batteries, and they'd shoot the 105 howitzers. So I was in headquarters, battalion headquarters.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about your first combat experience?
We went in the line on December the 7th. What was that, 1944? At a little town by the name of La Petite Pierre. or Looneyville, someplace in that area. And of course, I was back at battalion headquarters, and so I was not directly on the front line. Thank goodness for that. But we fired a few missions and then pulled back and reorganized and went back in line, I think maybe a week later. It's hard to remember.
Now, were you involved in the Battle of Herlisheim?
No. Being back with the battalion headquarters, I wasn't up that far forward. So I was fortunate in having the job I had. I got scared a few times, but never directly under fire.
Now, the 12th rush to the Rhine in Patton's Third Army. Tell me about the pace and how that worked.
We got orders one evening to get rid of all identifying insignia on our vehicles and our billfolds and stuff like that. And we took off and drove to Trier, which was, I think, Luxembourg, and headed east from there to the Rhine. We just stayed on the road. Never pulled off the road except for a fire mission and back on the road again. And we headed east and cut them to pieces.
Now, of course, I have to ask, General Patton, everyone I've interviewed has their own opinion about him. Let's hear yours.
Well, he knew armor and knew how to use armor. And he also had the opinion that being on the offensive was safer than being on the defensive. And that's the way he fought the war. So I had no personal contact with him other than that, being spearheaded with him.
Now, once across the Rhine and into Germany, were you ever involved in or did you witness any of the liberations of the prisoner of war camps or the concentration camps?
Not directly. I saw some of the people that, after they'd been released, are freed from the concentration camps. So there's no question in my mind about what they existed.
Okay. Can you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard that the war had ended?
We were heading down the Inn River towards Innsbruck. And we were on the one side of the river, and there was a town directly across the river from us. And the column got stopped, and we were sitting there, and the sun was shining, the birds were singing. We knew the war was about over, and everybody was happy and feeling good, and all of a sudden everything broke loose. And we headed as far underground as we could get. But they had a TOT across the river, time on target. They had 180 some guns from all the way from the 105s clear back to Long Toms, came in all at the same time at the little town across the river. And it scared everybody to death, and we realized what had happened, because up to that time everything was quiet. They were setting the TOT up. And so we realized what had happened. We said they were 200 yards over fire again. That was the last artillery fire that I remember. I think the next day we pulled back to Heidenheim. So we knew the war was over and we were still alive.
Now, After the war concluded, how long before you came back to the States?
I came back in January. I guess the war was over in May, and it was the next January I got back to the States. Discharged the 2nd of February. That would be 1946.
Now, along the way, anything that I didn't ask about that you'd like to talk about? Any experiences, people, stories that you'd like to share?
I had a strange job of being a bugler. And a lot of the guys after the war was over and went to the association reunions, said, "You remember Poucher?" "No, I don't remember Poucher." "Sure you remember him. He was the bugler." "Oh, the bugler. Oh, yeah, I remember him." So that was my history. I had a cornet. I didn't use a bugle. I had a cornet, and that was better music than the bugle. But we had 5 buglers at one time, one from each battery. And so I pulled bugle of the guard once a week, basically, which said I didn't have to stand guard or didn't have to pull KP. So it was a pretty soft job. And so that lasted until we shipped overseas. But I stood guard maybe once or twice the whole time I was in the service. So I was lucky. That was a good way to goof off, really, because during the day I set up at the battalion headquarters, sat there and read field manuals and stuff like that. Didn't have anything to do but sit there and wait till somebody sending a message down to Charlie Battery or something. Take the message down, come back and sit down and wait for the next bugle call. So it was a pretty easy job.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down for this interview.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.